Have you ever heard the tale of the Black Samurai? Now, you might have seen his story told on Netflix, but you're about to get the breakdown of his actual life, as far as we can tell. Now, Yasuke's origins are unclear, but there are claims that he was born in either Mozambique, Ethiopia, or Sudan. But as with most African slaves, his life wasn't documented. We don't even know what his original name was. So the most reliable place we can really start with Yasuke's story is with the Portuguese Empire. Now, they had their tentacles all over the world by the 16th century and had spread as far as the Asian Pacific, with an interest in trading with the East. They landed in Japan in 1543. And soon after, they were joined by their European priests, with the aim of spreading Christianity throughout the world. Having already established their influence in Africa, particularly Mozambique, their involvement in the slave trade is where they first came into contact with the boy who would later seal his place in history as the Black Samurai. Now, that's not to say that he was definitely from Mozambique, but as I said, it's one of the theories. Now, at the mercy of the Portuguese, he was soon handed over to one of their Jesuit missionaries, Alessandro Valignano. By this time, he had been educated in Christian ways and would join his master in the monitoring of the spread of the religion globally. His journey eastward would begin. In 1579, Valignano arrived in Japan from India with his African servant in tow. Now, I say servant. It's thought that Yasuke was given more of kind of a bodyguard role because of his stature, which I'll get into later in the video. But literally everything about his life prior to his arrival in Japan is up for debate. But either way, we can be pretty sure that at this time he was still regarded as a slave. Now, when he arrived in Japan, he obviously stood out a lot. He was about a foot taller than most locals, and his skin color was something they'd just never seen before. There was a lot of fascination around him. He was treated almost like a wonder or a spectacle. People were literally stampeding over each other just to get a look at him. Some were even crushed to death. Now, at the time, Japan had a lot of internal conflict. Land was divided in a feudal society, with landowners, or daimyo, always seeking to increase their control and expand their territories. Oda Nobunaga was one such landowner, and it was Yasuke's fate to serve under him. Now, this warring society had been about for nearly 100 years, and by this time, Nobunaga had managed to seize much of Japan. He's actually come to be known as the country's first great unifier, but his rivals were still fierce. This was by no means going to be a life of luxury for Yasuke. Upon their first meeting, Nobunaga had no concept of black skin. There were theories that he was actually a Portuguese man covered in black ink. So Yasuke was quite vigorously scrubbed down with the intention of revealing his white skin. Now, obviously this didn't achieve what Nobunaga was expecting, but this is actually where things started to change for Yasuke. Nobunaga kind of took him under his wing in a way, educating him in the Japanese language and giving him a position as warrior. As I said, Yasuke was a lot bigger in stature than the native Japanese people, so his strength and power was something unique, and Nobunaga knew that he'd be an asset. And this is where Nobunaga gave him his Japanese name, Yasuke. Nobunaga admired his warrior spirit, and over time the men began to bond. Yasuke would tell stories of his past in Africa and about his travels with Valignano, and Nobunaga would regale him with the history of Japan and some great samurai tales. Yasuke quickly rose to prominence, at least in the eyes of Nobunaga. Their bond became a close friendship, and he had the rare privilege of dining with the daimyo, also receiving his own piece of land, a residence on it, and a short katana, which is the classic and iconic Japanese samurai sword, which I'm sure you've seen before. And this was hugely symbolic. This is when Yasuke was officially made a samurai. In terms of the Japanese class system, samurai were at the top. It was a sought-after honor, which was usually bestowed through family bloodlines. Samurai were regarded as military nobility, so I'm sure you can imagine it was a highly protected and respected role. It was unprecedented for a normal everyday person to become a samurai, let alone a foreigner whose family history was all but unknown. Now, this does sound like the kind of friendship that would have been developed over decades, but Yasuke's documented story is actually really short. Everything I've covered so far, and everything that will be covered in this video, all occurred in the space of just a few years. Now, Yasuke's story has kind of become a little bit mythical over time, and his abilities in battle are seen as almost godlike. He's described as having the strength of 10 men and operating with a ruthless fury that you wouldn't want to get in the way of. And this was tested at the Battle of Tenmokuzan in 1582. Like I said, it was a feudal society, so the battle for land was constant. So as Nobunaga launched this advance on the Takeda clan, Yasuke would be given his first taste of battle as a samurai. That warrior spirit that he had came out in this kind of fierce fury. His abilities certainly stood out from those around him, and Nobunaga's men would see their opposition burn down their fortress and retreat into the mountains. Now, not long after their success at the Battle of Tenmokuzan, Nobunaga was called upon for help. Long story short, Nobunaga arranged to have tea at the Honnoji temple where he was staying in Kyoto with the leader of another clan of samurais to discuss war efforts. Now, Nobunaga essentially let his guard down. His time at the temple was very casual and informal, so although he had Yasuke with him, he was very exposed should there be an attack on him. Now, this is when Nobunaga ordered his samurai general Akechi Mitsuhide to lead his army of 13,000 warriors to help defend this clan. It's said that Mitsuhide deliberately misled his men into advancing on the Honnoji temple where Nobunaga was staying. So the handful of servants and Yasuke were suddenly defending their master against 13,000 men. Despite a valiant effort, Nobunaga would commit seppuku, which was a ritualistic suicide committed in order to retain honor. The reasons for the betrayal are unclear, and somehow Yasuke managed to escape the ambush. He made his way to the Nijo castle where he would join up with Nobunaga's son, Oda Nobunaga, who was gathering forces. Of course, Yasuke joined Nobutada's men as they attempted to avenge the death of the much respected Nobunaga. And he arrived just in time. Mitsuhide's men were now advancing on the Nijo castle. Again, Yasuke would fight valiantly, but ultimately he was captured by Mitsuhide's men. As you can imagine, the capture of Yasuke would have been a massive coup for the samurais, and he was presented to the samurai general. I guess the expectation was that he wanted to be the man to kill the African samurai, but according to the limited reports we have, Mitsuhide decided that as Yasuke was black, he was essentially an animal, and obviously he wasn't Japanese, so he wouldn't be killed. Instead, he was allegedly taken to a Christian church in Kyoto, where he would be reunited with the Jesuit priests who first brought him to Japan. Now, as I said, we know very little about his life before he got to Japan, and as his time as a samurai came to an end, his incredible story goes completely cold. But Yasuke isn't the only African to travel east and make a name for himself. Check out this short playlist about the life of Malik Ambar, and I'll see you there.